Hello. This episode is about another part in the web application security testing series. I'm excited to read an article and to share with you the map from the article and the different dimensions that we talk about regarding Bitcoin security and maps on this podcast. So there won't be many items. It's just the map in the article in this one. So here's the map. As you see here, the sphere of weakness, risk, and mitigation. So at the top, we have a section. In the middle, we have a section, and then the subsections. I have to speak like this for those tuning in audio because through a visual map, you can see the whole article in one go. And at least, in general, without reading it, without turning on your mind, you see that there's keywords. There seems to be, 3 general main sections, maybe 4. You can see that there's relations between points. So already you're offered something more than just text of paragraphs of text. And I'll explain briefly the first top part here. It has to do with the secret layers of the security subculture of web application security testing. Later on, we have from the professional layer. And layers, by the way, I explain in another episode later on. Something from the business layer and from the specialization layer. The deepest is a secret, then professional, then business, then professional, then specialization, which is merely just like technical work. So from that layer, you can also call it a dimension, we have this section. So this is just to show you the sections. But let's start, and I'll show this map again shortly. Back to me for a second. You can watch me putting on a mustache, because that's what I do every episode. And I'll have different mustaches different times. Sometimes I don't even say that I have a mustache, and I just put one on whenever I remember. I'm liking this one at the moment. It has to do with the fact that some of us work on red teams as social engineers, so some of us can't be found out at certain times of certain projects during certain events. Okay, let's get right to it. Here's the article. It's the sphere of weakness, risk, and mitigation, published on Medium in my Cyberpowered Telenoia series publication there. So here we go. In the context of web application security testing, my previous 2 articles were about multidimensional security mapping, followed by an overview of security assessment methods. Now let's enliven these fundamental concepts by adding an asymmetrical layer in motion, the words to describe the main actions of a cyberpower wizard. I will be using the described wizardry language of points, layers, dimensions, and spheres from the point of view of an alternate sphere of InfoSec. If you think this is a wasteful stream of alphabet strings, then consider changing dimensions for a day. When calculating risk, you are essentially moving across levels in a dimension while maintaining a connection with a second dimension. More on this in the deeper risk layer. Understanding risk wizardry. In the process of web application security testing, from threat modeling to red teaming, you're looking for weaknesses and simulating threats that could exploit any vulnerabilities, assessing the risks associated with those vulnerabilities, determining the severity level and potential impact of exploiting those vulnerabilities, and then working on mitigation strategies to reduce those risks. If an incident occurs, you'd engage in incident response to manage and learn from the situation. So many words, yet very meaningful and precise. What came first, the threat or the weakness? Viewing this question from an alternate sphere, I don't think there would be any weaknesses if there was no threats. So threats come first. Human life on Earth is not weak nor destructive when it is able to evolve psychologically. As I wrote in my article about Vipassana last year, if people weren't taken by an attachment to impermanence, then there would be no need for security. The threat. A threat is any factor, internal or external, that can take advantage of a vulnerability. Anything that may adversely impact the organization, assets, individuals, or simply harm the assets owned by an application. The assets in an application may be resources of value, such as the data in a database or in the file system. The threat may be a malicious external attacker, an internal user, a rogue malicious software, a system instability, a circumstance, a situation or state, an event, etc. The types of threats that could exploit the vulnerabilities outlined in the OWASP Top 10 include, here's the list. So, malicious actors, hackers. These are individuals or groups who intentionally exploit vulnerabilities in web applications for personal gain, to inflict damage, or for other malicious purposes. They might be motivated by financial gain, political reasons, or simply the thrill of breaking into systems. They could be located anywhere in the world. Second, insider threats. These are individuals within an organization who have authorized access to the network and systems. They may be employees, former employees, contractors, or business partners. Insider threats can be malicious individuals who intentionally cause harm, or unintentional individuals who accidentally cause a breach. Botnets are networks of infected computers that are controlled remotely by an attacker, usually without the knowledge of the computer owners. Botnets can be used to carry out attacks such as DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, sending spam emails, spreading malware, or stealing data. Malware. This is software that is specifically designed to disrupt, damage, or gain unauthorized access to a computer system. This includes viruses, worms, ransomware, spyware, and other malicious programs. Phishing attacks. Phishing is a type of social engineering attack where the attacker tricks the victim into revealing sensitive information, such as usernames, passwords, credit card numbers, etc. Phishing can also be used to trick users into clicking on malicious links or attachments that install malware. Next, brute force attacks. In a brute force attack, the attacker attempts to gain access to a system by systematically trying all possible combinations of passwords or encryption keys, etc., until the correct one is found. Wizard in the middle attacks. In a WITM attack, previously known as MITM, the attacker secretly intercepts and possibly alters the communication between two parties who believe they are directly communicating with each other. Just joking about the wizard, it's usually called a man, but I have seen person. Due to the machine learning, it could be called entity now, but when I come up with a good one from another sphere, I will let you know. It could be trust, as trust is actually trustlessness, but not in the sense of zero knowledge proofs on ML output checks of algorithms. Exploit kits. These are software tools that automate the exploitation of vulnerabilities in software. They are typically used by attackers to propagate malware. State-sponsored attacks. Some attacks are carried out by groups that are believed to be directed or funded by nation-states. These attacks are often highly sophisticated and targeted. Advanced persistent threats, APTs. These are stealthy and continuous computer hacking processes often orchestrated by criminals targeting a specific entity. These threats often use multiple phases to break into a network, avoid detection, and harvest valuable info over the long term. Each of these threats can potentially exploit one or more of the vulnerabilities listed in the OWASP Top 10, either directly or indirectly. For example, a phishing attack could lead to a broken authentication if a user is tricked into revealing their login credentials. Now a little bit about weakness. A type of issue that under circumstances could lead to a vulnerability in the application. In human design systems, the human is the source, whether intentional or unintentional. At the moment, it must be said, we mostly have human designed systems, unless one is using AI, but the AI would then also be considered as being human designed. So until we have purely AI designed AI, then all is human source. The maliciousness of the dark triad in this realm and its spheres is for another upcoming article series. A little bit about vulnerability. The presence of a flaw or weakness, single or chained, in the design or implementation, operation, or management of an information system or its environment, which can be exploited to adversely affect an organization's security objectives, assets, or operations. It is a layer higher than weakness. Sometimes, as part of red teaming, the application itself, a product, IT system, could be the vulnerability. In the context of information security, the terms weakness and vulnerability are often interchangeable, but they do have nuanced differences. A little bit about those now. Weakness is a broader term, referring to a flaw or inadequacy in a system or its components, which may potentially lead to a vulnerability. For example, weak or simplistic passwords can be a security weakness. A vulnerability is a specific type of weakness that can be exploited by a threat to gain unauthorized access or perform unauthorized actions in a system. If an attacker knows a user's weak password and can gain access to their account, the weak password is then considered a vulnerability. So while all vulnerabilities are weaknesses, not all weaknesses necessarily constitute vulnerabilities. It is the context and potential for exploitation that can transform one into the vulnerability. Next, we have a little bit about Mitra, CWE, and CVE. This corporation maintains both the common vulnerabilities and exposures system and common weakness enumeration system. While they are related, they serve different purposes within cybersecurity. The CVE is a list of publicly disclosed cybersecurity vulnerabilities. The CWE is a community-developed list of software and hardware weakness types. It goes a layer deeper than CVE by focusing on the underlying vulns in software and hardware that could lead to exploitable security risks. So the CVE is about specific reported vulnerabilities, while the CWE is about categorizing types of weaknesses that can lead to those vulnerabilities. A little bit about vulnerability assessment now. In the context of web application security testing, this involves identifying, quantifying, and prioritizing the vulnerabilities in a system. Some of the steps involved in doing so are the following. Scoping. This is to determine the extent of the assessment, define which systems, networks, or software need to be tested, and the rules of engagement if it's a live environment. Information gathering. Gather information about the target application, such as languages used, the APIs it exposes, the servers it runs on, and more, also known as RECON. Vulnerability identification. Utilize various tools and methodologies to identify them. This might involve static analysis, dynamic analysis, automated scanning, manual penetration testing. The vulnerability analysis, continuing, once the vulnerabilities have been identified, now is the time to analyze them to understand their nature, the potential impact, and the degree of risk they present. This could involve reproducing the vulnerability to confirm its existence and potential impact. So, from IBM Skills Build, vulnerabilities are a potential weakness within a system that could be exploited to compromise it. A vuln could be a web page that does not authenticate a user correctly. Next up, reporting, document the findings, including the vulnerabilities identified, their potential impact, and recommended remediation steps. Reports should be written in clear, understandable language. Risk classification. The vulns are classified based on their risk level. This usually considers the potential impact of the vuln and the likelihood of it being exploited. Common scales are high, medium, low, or using a numeric scale like the CVSS, Common Vulnerability Scoring System. Remediation. Provide actionable remediation advice for each vuln, such as software patches, configuration changes, or coding best practices. Little note in italics now. Vulnerability assessment is not a one-time activity, but a continuous process. as new vulnerabilities may be introduced over time through changes in the application, newly discovered vulnerability types, or changes in the threat landscape. Next up, addressing vulnerabilities. When a vuln has been identified and addressed, it is commonly said to have been mitigated, resolved, or patched. Mitigated means that the actions have been taken to lessen the severity, seriousness, or painfulness of the vuln. Resolved indicates that the vuln issue has been settled or a solution has been found. Patched means usually when a piece of code has been specifically written and deployed to fix the vuln. It's named after the idea of patching, putting a patch on a hole. A little bit in italics. In the context of a report or documentation, you might say something like, the reported XSS vulnerability in the application search function has been patched as of version 2.1.4. Next up, risks. Risks represent the potential for loss or damage when a threat exploits a vulnerability arising out of a weakness. Risk is a function of the likelihood of a given threat source exploiting a vulnerability and the resulting impact on the web application product and organization. So, bold italics now. Here we go. This is fascinating because in order to evaluate the risk, one has to move into a higher level within the dimension of the web application product under test. This level has to surround the web application, and sufficient knowledge of two dimensions is necessary: the language of the corresponding security and the language of the particular product. Then a cyberpower wizard has to bridge the two and zap. Identifying impact and likelihood for critical system security vulnerabilities might be the highest paid job on the planet, if you know what I mean. Risk assessment in the context of web application security testing is a systematic process that involves identifying vulns, determining the potential impacts of exploiting those vulnerabilities, and prioritizing remediation efforts based on the level of risk. Now moving in. Identify vulns using tools and techniques like static analysis, dynamic analysis, pen testing. You can find potential vulns in a web application. This can include things like code flaws, insecure config, unpatched software, etc. Determining the impact. So for each identified vuln, determine the potential impact if it were to be exploited. For our web application, this could range from relatively minor impacts, such as slight performance degradation, to severe impacts, such as data breaches resulting in loss of sensitive data, damage to the organization's reputation, financial loss, or legal implications. Evaluate likelihood. So, assess the likelihood of each vuln being exploited. This can depend on factors like the complexity of the exploit, the skills and resources required, and the visibility of the vulnerability, as well as the presence of motivated, skilled, and funded attackers. Likelihood can be noteworthy as it is on the rise due to the increasing popularity of unethical hacking. This also depends on the threat actor's ability for multidimensionality. A vulnerability that is easy to exploit and provides a high reward for an attacker would be likely to be exploited. An extra deeper note now from IBM Skills Build. Within cybersecurity, likelihood is hard to directly measure due to the constant evolution of technology and involvement of outside attackers. As a good rule of thumb, the likelihood of an organization being attacked depends partly on three attributes as follows. Likelihood equals adversary capability times adversary motivation times vulnerability severity. An adversary is a general term used to describe an entity who wishes to compromise an information system. Next, in order to calculate the risk, which is usually a function of the impact and likelihood, for example, this is how we go. A high-impact vulnerability that is also likely to be exploited would be considered a high-risk vulnerability. Conversely, a low-impact vuln that is unlikely to be exploited would be a low-risk vulnerability. So risk equals impact times likelihood, which is the E's, and you get the severity level from this result. Now, the severity level is a measure of the seriousness of a vulnerability, typically based on the potential impact and the ease of exploitation. Vulnerabilities are often classified into severity levels such as low, medium, high, or critical to help prioritize remediation efforts. For a more quantitative approach, you might use a scoring system, such as the CVSS, which provides a way to capture the principal characteristics of a vuln and produce a numerical score based on the factors such as impact to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the system, and the complexity of exploiting the vuln. Next up, you might prioritize the remediation efforts. Based on the calculated risk, you can prioritize those efforts. Higher risk should be generally addressed first, followed by medium and low risk. The goal of risk assessment is not to eliminate all risk, which is likely impossible, but to manage the risk to an acceptable level given the resources and the risk tolerance of the organization. Once the risks are understood, they can be addressed. For example, a company develops an online service, which is an asset. An error in the code, which is a vulnerability, allows for unauthorized access to user data. Cybercriminals, the threats, discovered this vulnerability. The potential damage to the company, such as financial loss and reputational damage due to a data breach, represents the risk. The company can mitigate this risk by fixing the coding error, thus eliminating the vulnerability and reducing the likelihood of the threat causing harm. You can start by identifying the vulns in the web app through methods such as pen testing or using automated scanning tools. For each vuln, you would assess the potential impact and likelihood of exploitation to determine the risk associated. Based on the risk, you assign a severity level to the vuln, which can help guide your remediation efforts. So the vulns with higher severity should be typically addressed first. Next up, managing those security risks. But let me show the map for a moment to see where we are here. Managing the security risks here. We have spoken about much of these sections here. Just looking at the map. Vulnerability assessments, scoping, info gathering, static dynamic. Right, this is all about that. The reporting there. So the types of risks. Right here, this is where we are. So we've gone through the higher level, the mid-level items with the headings in the article, and we're just now talking about underneath the mitigation strategies, reducing risk, and so we're addressing the risk here. There's more of the business behind it all. Back to the article here. So when it comes to managing security risks, mitigation is just one part of the larger strategy. Several other steps can be taken as part of a comprehensive approach to reduce the risk of security incidents. Risk acceptance. So sometimes the cost of mitigating a risk can outweigh the potential loss. In such cases, the organization may choose to accept the risk. This doesn't mean ignoring the risk, but consciously deciding to accept it and monitor it closely. Next, risk avoidance. In some cases, a risk can be avoided altogether by not performing an activity that could lead to the risk. For example, not storing sensitive customer data. If not necessary for the business, this would avoid the risk associated with a potential data breach. Next, risk transfer. This involves offloading some of the risk to another party, often in the form of insurance. For instance, cybersecurity insurance can help cover the costs related to a security incident. Risk mitigation. This is about reducing the risk level by implementing controls and measures to minimize the likelihood or impact of a security incident. Patching and updating means keeping systems, software, and applications up to date, which is crucial in reducing the risk of security incidents. Many breaches are due to unpatched vulns. Security awareness training. Employees can often be a weak point in security due to phishing or simple mistakes, so regular training can reduce the risk of such incidents. Incident response planning. Incidents can always happen, so having a robust incident response plan can help minimize the damage when they do. Next, regular auditing and testing. So security audits, pen testing, and vuln assessments are crucial to discover and address potential security issues before they can be exploited. These steps, together with a strong security culture and the use of security frameworks and best practices, can help organizations significantly reduce their risk of security incidents. Now, a little bit about how serious is vulnerability or risk here? So a little bit about severity levels, perhaps. What is the severity level? Or why is the severity level a measure of seriousness of a vulnerability instead of the seriousness of risk? So severity level versus risk. The severity level is often associated with a specific vuln because it helps to describe the potential impact that could result if that particular vulnerability were to be exploited, and the factors like complexity of exploiting the vuln. Risk, on the other hand, is more encompassing and extend beyond individual vulnerabilities. So it considers not only the severity of the vulns, but also external factors such as threats and their capabilities, as well as the likelihood of the vulnerabilities being exploited. Let's see, while severity gives us an idea about how bad a vulnerability could be, risk gives us an idea about the likelihood that a vulnerability could actually lead to an impactful event, given the broader context. So, in a sense, the severity of a vulnerability is a component of the overall risk, but it's not the whole picture. The risk involves other factors such as threat landscape, exposure time, mitigating factors, and even aspects like the value of the affected assets, business impact, or regulatory and compliance implications. In a practical scenario, you might have a high severity vuln in an application, but if there are other controls in place, like network segregation, limited user access, or threat detection systems, the actual risk of it being exploited might be lower. Conversely, a low severity vuln might present a higher risk if it's in a critical system, is easily exploitable, and the impact of exploitation is high. That's why it's important to use both severity and risk as part of a comprehensive approach to vuln management and not conflate the two. The OWASP Top 10 Dimension. The OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project Top 10, is a standard awareness document for developers and web application security experts. It represents a broad consensus about the most critical security risks to web applications. The goal of the OWASP Top 10 is to educate devs, designers, architects, managers, and organizations about the consequences of the most common and most important web application security weaknesses. The OWASP Top 10 provides basic techniques to protect against these high-risk problem areas and provides guidance on where to go from there. I wrote this article with the knowledge from my excellent school course instructors, such as AD from bezpiecznycode.pl, select books, some experience, my own mind maps, and ChatGPT. The bridge dimensions I wish to present are my work as part of a deep dive into specific upcoming articles about web assessment, vulnerabilities in web app applications through Black Box Stealth Recon. I hope this episode provided some insight into the sphere of weakness, risk, and mitigation. There's quite a few information that we went through, looking back at the map here. And this map will be in the article and published elsewhere as well over time. Also, I'll be referring to it. And a little additional point at the end here is that at the top of the map, in the secret domain there, we have the fact that I'll be referring to again in the future. I see it's the image is not moving anymore, but I'll talk about it just momentarily for a moment here. So you can see there that the dimension of security is overlapped by the dimension of the product, and the vulnerability is the point, and you have the sphere there, and that is an aspect of multidimensionality there, that the human attainment of the product and the security overlapping, the fact that you can overlap your knowledge of dimensions in security and the knowledge of dimensions of the product, and focus on the vulnerability as a point when those dimensions overlap inside the sphere of contemporary popular knowledge, for example, layered from the deepest secret layer to the next to the business and professional and the specialization layer to assess that vulnerability. You basically have an unknown sphere, which is the same as Bitcoin in that sense. There you see Bitcoin circled in orange. The origins of Bitcoin are also unknown. The origins, perhaps, and the exploitation technique of this vulnerability may also be completely unknown and beyond anything that is known. We'll talk about that more another time. But you can see on this map also in the blue rectangle there that the recon is underneath the pink multidimensionality there where it says offensive, where we simulate being a threat. And some of the first stages of simulation of being a threat is going stealth recon as part of a vulnerability assessment at some point. And so that you have it there in the blue rectangle. And okay, well, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed coming together on all these points. I enjoyed sharing these with you. And if you would like to offer support, remember there's NOSTR, Fountain FM app where you can stream sats. And I'll see you at the meetups. Remember to check out the show notes for other information regarding this.